Okay, so with this lesson, again, I make these Edpuzzles skippable for a reason. For some of you guys who are watching this video, this is going to be super easy. You're like, I can look at the problem and know what to do. I don't need a formula. But I did go over the formulas and the key terms because I've taught this lesson before using more common sense or stuff like that. And kids would get it mixed up. So if you can read a problem and immediately go, I should multiply or I should divide, then you don't need to do all of what I'm doing. I'm just doing this because some people who are not able to immediately look at a problem and go, oh, hey, I need to multiply or divide. I want to give them a way that's a guarantee for sure. Hey, if you know how to do it this way, then you'll get the problem right. That's literally all that's happening, though, is multiplying or dividing. Again, the formulas that we're going to be using, or if you use the formulas, it's right over here, are going to be distance formula, D equals RT. And then distance formula if we're talking about using gallons, miles per gallon times the gallons. So we're going to be using these two. But again, if you want to just fly through this lesson, if you can look at a problem and you're like, multiply or divide, that's really it. It's either going to be multiplying or dividing, then you can kind of ignore what I'm doing here. So let's go through this. A car travels at an average rate of speed of 50 miles per hour for 6 hours. How far does this car travel? So here's how we know which version of this we're using. Distance formula given speed, or trying to find speed, or anything to do with speed. It does not say anything about gallons in the problem, and so it's not going to be this formula. So we're going to be using D equals RT. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug in the information we have and solve for the variable we don't have. That's it. What's going to end up happening is we're either going to multiply two numbers or we're going to divide two numbers. So let's see what we have. A car travels an average rate of speed of 50 miles per hour. Rate of speed, therefore, what do you think this variable is? For the ones we've got here. R, right? R is going to be considered, I keep clicking on the wrong things here. R is going to be considered the rate of speed. Yeah, there's a reason why they say it that way, but that's what we're saying. And then we have 6 hours. Hey, we know that, that's time. So what this means is I'm going to go ahead and plug these in where they go and solve for the variable that I don't have. We can see that we do not have D, right? We do have R, which is 50, and we do have T, which is 6. Literally, all we're going to have to do here then is just multiply these two numbers because D is already by itself, right? I'm not going to have to move anything over to get a variable by itself. I just got to solve. So let's plug that in the calculator. 50 times 6, what do we get? That should be 300. Now, again, in Canvas, you're not going to have any units. You're not going to need to put any units. But this is miles, right? Because the question is, how far does the car travel? So, and with these guys, again, as you go through them, like I said, you don't need to use this formula every time, but just ask yourself if your answer makes sense. If you divided 50 by 6, you would get a number less than 10. We're going 50 miles per hour for 6 hours. And you would only go a little bit less than 10 miles? No, 50 miles per hour. Here's another hint here. Per hour means to multiply with hours. Per is a multiply word, just like each, of, and every. So that is why we multiplied here 50 times the hours, because we had the hours to multiply with. Once more, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I also want to make sure it makes sense for those of you guys who cannot immediately look at it and go, oh, it's multiplication. A lot of you guys probably could have looked at that problem and gone, we multiplied. But I'm going to go ahead and slow it down a little bit just to make sure we got this. Let's go ahead and try it again. Jack lives in New York and will be attending college in Atlanta, Georgia. The driving distance between the two cities is 883 miles. He figures that he's going to average about 60 miles per hour on his trip. At this average rate, for how long will he be driving? So again, what you want to do here is realize which version of the formula we're using if you're trying to slow this down. Once more, I know a lot of you guys can look at this problem and immediately know what to do. I'm going to talk it through as if you don't. If you know what to do, skip ahead in the video to the answer, and then you can see if you're right. But let's label the information we have. The driving distance, hey, distance. This is going to be then what variable that we're working with here in our formulas. Wrong thing. There we go. D, this is going to be D, right? That's the distance. He figures that he will average about 60 miles per hour on the trip. Now, again, it doesn't say it here as clearly as it did last time, but what variable would this be based on, again, what we were using last time? This is going to be R. Again, R is your rate of speed. That's what they mean. So I'm going to be using D equals RT because, once again, I keep clicking the wrong thing, because they're not talking about gallons. If they talk about gallons, then yeah, we're going to use this version of the formula. It's basically the same thing. It's just multiplying two things together, but we don't want to get confused here. So let's take a moment and plug in what we know and solve for what we don't. So write this out with our D and our R plugged in, and then click continue and we'll see if we have the same thing. Again, I know I'm breaking this down super slow, but like I said, I just don't want to risk losing anybody who it's not clicking for. Times T. That's what it should look like plugged in. 883, R is 60, RT again means R times T. So this is 60 times T. So then from here again, what we do is we look at this equation and we do whatever we need to do to solve it. In the last case, it was just multiplying because D was already by itself. But here, T is not by itself, and we need to get it by itself. So what should we do to get T by itself here? We should divide by 60. So I'm going to need to go to the calculator for this because I don't know this off the top of my head. 883 divided by 60. Okay, so you guys should get 14.7, we can go ahead and say, hours. Again, you're not going to need to put units in Canvas, but it is important to understand what your answer represents to see if it makes sense. Because again, that's about right. 883 miles, 14 hours, yeah. From New York to Georgia, it's kind of a long distance. If you multiplied, you would get a massive number, and that would make no sense either. It's not going to take that long, right? Also, guys, just be careful. If you are dividing, make sure you're doing it the right way. If you did the 60 on top, we'd end up with a number less than 1, and then once more, that makes no sense. It's going to take a good chunk of time, not too much, but not too little, to get from New York to Georgia. Once more, you could have just looked at this problem and known I'm going to divide those numbers. Some people are able to do that. If you're not able to look at a problem and know I should multiply or I should divide, use the formula. So go ahead and try this one more time. Again, you need to figure out, what do I have? Do I have D? Do I have R? Do I have T? Plug it in and then just do what you need to do to solve the equation. Or read it and see if you can tell I should be multiplying or I should be dividing. Okay, so once again, this is going to be D equals RT because it's not talking about gallons. This is the distance. This is the R. So plugging it in, 1401 equals 58 times T. This is another situation where we are going to be dividing by 58. If you were able to look at the problem and know, hey, I need to divide, good. Just do that. You don't need to use the formula. You can go straight to just dividing the two numbers. We got T equals 24 point, let's say 2 hours. Yeah, a whole day. That sounds about right. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to keep going with this. Now we're going to be getting into the other formula where we're talking about miles per gallon. But hopefully, again, guys, you can see you got a 50% chance even if you guess. I don't want you to guess. I want you to use the formula if you feel like you're guessing. But it is going to be either just multiplying or dividing the two numbers, and that's it. So let's take a look at the next one. Juan has a hybrid car that averages 40 miles per gallon. Hey, gallons. That tells us immediately we're going to use this version of the formula. D equals MPG times gallons. MPG is miles per gallon, right? His car has a 12-gallon tank. How far can he travel on one full tank of gas? It's important to keep an eye on if they say like 1 or 2 or several tanks of gas, because that'll affect how many gallons we actually have. So I just labeled that actually. 40 is the MPG, 12 is the gallons. I mean, it's already labeled for us. Once more, if you can read this problem and know I should just multiply or I should just divide, all more power to you. Do that, skip to the end of the question, and see if you're right. But take a moment here. If you don't know if you should multiply or divide, we have MPG, we have gallon, pop them in their spots and see what we need to do. So we don't have D. So D gets copied down, right? That's how we know that D is just going to get popped down. MPG is 40. Gallons is 12 because it's one full tank. If it said two tanks, this would need to be 24. So keep an eye out for that. Well, hey, this is already good to go. Like I said, once we just plug into the equation, we just do what we need to do. And because D is by itself, all we need to do is multiply that, which comes out to be 480. And again, because this is distance, this is 480 what? Miles. Again, ask yourself if it makes sense. You can go 40 miles per gallon, which is really good. A hybrid car, yeah, can go quite a while on just 1 gallon because they're also using electricity. On 12 gallons, yeah. Miles per gallon multiply with gallons. Okay, try it again. This one now, however, is going to have one extra step, so we really have to understand what our answers represent. Because if we have multiple steps here and we don't know what our answer even is, like if it's gallons or if it's miles or whatever, we can get jumbled up. So Juan has a hybrid car that once again averages 40 miles per gallon. He is planning a 670-mile trip. How much should Juan expect to spend for gas on this trip if the average price is $3.10 per gallon? This is math I actually have to do. I sponsor the Korean Club. I've talked about it lots of times. I take a trip with my kids every year, minus the past 2, this and last year, to LA for a Korean music festival. And because it's a club trip, I have to submit paperwork to the bookstore about how much money I'm going to be spending on gas. And so I have to do this math. I go, okay, well, it's about 350 miles to LA and back. I'm going to double that. As well as while we're driving in LA, we're probably going to be driving at least another 100, maybe 200 miles while we're in there. So let me add that on. My car gets about 25 on the low end miles per gallon. And then I do the math and I look up the gas prices in California and I go, okay, because California gas is super expensive, let me do that math and figure out, okay, let's estimate about how much I should budget for gas. If you're ever planning a road trip, this is math you'll want to do if you want to plan and make sure you've got enough money to spend on gas. So let's go ahead and try it. Once again, because it says gallons, we know we're going to be using this version of the formula. What? MPG times gallons. And let's go ahead through and label what we have. This is the MPG. For Pete's sake, there we go. 670-mile trip. What is that in our formula here? That's D, right? That's the distance. Now, the question does say, what's going to be the price of all the gas? I hope we can understand that we need to know how many gallons to answer this question. This is going to be our final step, is figuring out the price, but we need to know how many gallons first. So go ahead and write this out. This is the MPG, 40. This is D. Plug into the formula where those things go and see if you can tell what you need to do. Okay, D is 670. The MPG is 40 times the gallons. And that's good because, again, in order to find how much he's going to be spending, we need to know how much gas he's going to use. And depending on your car, that changes, right? Again, a hybrid car, you don't need to buy as much gas. If you've got an 85 Chevy Suburban truck like my brother-in-law, you get 8 miles to the gallon, and you're going to spend a lot more money on gas. So what should we do here to figure out how many gallons we need? We should be dividing, right? This is 40 times the gallons. We're going to undo that. So here's how many gallons he needs. 670 divided by 40, which happens to be 16.75. So he's going to use about that much gas. How do we find the cost for it if it's $3.10 per gallon? What should we do for our last step? You guys should know this is to multiply, right? If I want the cost of something, I want how many of the things I'm buying times its cost. Again, per gallon is a multiply word. How many gallons we have times the cost. So multiply that out. You should get 51, and then let's go ahead and round this up to 93. So that's about how much he should budget for gas for this trip. Not too bad, actually. 670 miles. And again, that's because he has a hybrid car. If he did not have a hybrid car, it'd be a lot more, because that would have a lower MPG. Okay, try this last one. Now, with this one, I'm going to kind of give you a little tip here. There is a number that we do not need. Yeah? So when you go through and look at the information we have, we once again are talking about gallons, so we know that this is the formula we're going to be using. There's something tricky here, though. If you're thinking you need to use this formula, one of these pieces of one of these numbers we're not going to use. So see if you can try it. Our end goal is to find the cost, right? But like I said, there's going to be a number that we're not going to use. Okay, so it says Julie has a car that averages 20 miles per gallon. This is MPG. All right, that's the 20. It does say she has a 15-gallon gas tank, so that is gallons. She's planning a 350-mile trip. That's D. Now, this is where you might have gotten stuck. You're like, wait, I have D, I have MPG, and I have gallons? I'm not solving for anything. Yes, you are, because one of these numbers we're not going to use. The question is, again, how much Julie should expect to spend on gas. So here's the number that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how big your tank is, right? You're just going to fill it up again. If your tank empties out, you just buy more gas. If your tank empties out, you just buy more gas. So it doesn't matter how big her tank is to figure out how much she's going to be spending on gas. She has to make the trip, right? So that doesn't matter. She will just refill her tank if she runs out. It does matter how many miles she gets to the gallons. So you should not have used the 15. You should have plugged in the 350 here. 20 is the MPG. And we're going to find how many gallons she would use for the trip. That's what this gallon represents, is not how many gallons her gas tank is, but how many gallons she would use for the trip. So we are going to divide by 20. Once again, if you can look at a problem and go, I should just divide. Good, do it. Don't need to write out this whole formula. But if you cannot consistently look at a problem and know, I should divide or I should multiply, use the formula. I think I know what this is. 17 or 17.5. Let's see. 350 divided by 20. Yeah, 17.5. So 17.5 gallons. And then what should we have done to get the cost here? With 17.5 gallons, 250 per gallon, we should multiply, right? 17.5 times 250. Because 250 per gallon, that's a multiply word. That's how much this trip would cost her. So this is kind of what I was saying earlier too, is that it's really important in this lesson that you understand what your answer represents to see if it makes sense. Because if your answer needs to represent hours and you end up with something like 10,000, that's too much. Honestly, it's too much for anything here. Yeah. So go back and read the question when you're done and always ask yourself, does it make sense? Yes. Throughout this whole lesson, you are only either multiplying or dividing, and that's it. So if you can look at a problem and know, I need to multiply or I need to divide, awesome, do it. But if not, rely on the formula, write your stuff down.